Hello class, welcome to Algebra Lesson 9-6, which is all about the quadratic formula and the discriminant. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to use the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. Alright, so right off the bat, let's get the quadratic formula out of the way. This here is our quadratic formula. Okay, so this is where we have a quadratic. So it looks something like this. Right? This should look like a familiar pattern. So if I were to fill it in with numbers, maybe it's 3x squared plus 2x minus 1 equals 0. Okay? So if I were to give you 3x squared plus 2x minus 1, you've been practicing how to solve these to figure out what those numbers are. We've practiced using like square roots, we've practiced factoring, we've practiced graphing, but sometimes those methods don't work, and that's because you're going to get like a really gross decimal number, and that's when you insert quadratic formula. Okay, so if we look at this, I have 3x squared plus 2x minus 1. What you need to be able to do is take those equations and identify what's your a value, what's your b value, and what's your c. Your a term is always whatever number's with your x squared, so in this case that'd be 3. Your b is always whatever's with your x, so in this case that'd be 2. And then your c is always the number that's by itself, in this case a negative 1. Okay? If this would have been minus 2x, like this, then my b value would be a negative 2. Okay, so you take the sign that's in front of your term. All right, make sure you get a screenshot of this page. This quadratic formula, you have to memorize, okay? You have to have this memorized. I'm going to link a couple of videos into Google Classroom that will help you remember how to use the quadratic formula. And I will include some videos that will help you memorize that quadratic formula. Because I don't know if you're like me, sometimes having a song helps you remember. So I'll put a few different song options to help you memorize that quadratic formula. But anyways, let's jump into what solving that looks like. So if we look at example 1, use the quadratic formula. We have x squared minus 4x equals 7. Right off of the bat, I need to get this equal to 0 before I can start doing anything. So I subtract 7 from both sides. I have x squared minus 4x minus 7 equals 0. Now that it's set equal to 0, I'm going to write what my a, b, and c values are. I highly recommend doing this. My a value is what's in front of my x squared. In this case, it's an invisible 1. My b value is this negative 4. And my c value is negative 7. So now I'm going to plug those into my quadratic formula. Okay. And like I said, this is probably going to look a little scary at first. So if I start solving this right now, negative b. So I'm going to write negative, and then my b value is a negative 4. So that becomes a positive 4, because negative and negative, or minus and negative, is positive. So negative 4 is positive 4 plus or minus the square root of my b value is a negative 4 squared. One of the most common errors I'll see students make is they'll forget parentheses around their negative number when they're squaring it. So in this case, negative 4 squared should be a positive 16, but when they plug it into their calculator, they get a negative 16. Make sure that's not you. Use those parentheses. Minus 4 times my a value is 1. My c value is negative 7. All right, and that's all over 2 times my a value, which is 1. Okay, so x equals this. I'm just going to simplify this a little bit. I have a positive 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared is positive 16. And then it's minus 4 times 1 times negative 7. That's negative 28. So minus a negative becomes plus all over 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, so if I keep going, I have 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 28 is 44. over 2. Don't know why that just changed colors. Let's try one more time. Okay, I'm going to keep simplifying. I have 4 plus or minus, and then the square root of 44 simplifies, right? That's 4 times 11. So that would become 2 square roots of 11 all over 2. And that still simplifies. Okay, this is going back to what we did in Chapter 9, Part 1. So I have a 4, 2, and a 2. So that becomes 2 plus or minus the square root of 11. I can leave my answer like this, or I can split it up into 2 answers if it asks for a decimal. In my calculator, I would type 2 plus the square root of 11, and if I do that, I would get 5.32, and I could say 2 minus the square root of 11, which if I did that, we get negative 1.32. Okay, so depending on what your answer has to be, if they say simplified radicals would be this first solution here. If they say decimal rounded to the nearest whatever, that would be what I listed second. Okay, so I just plugged things in and kept simplifying until I got numbers. I'm going to do another one because I know it can be overwhelming. So I have 21 minus 4x equals x squared. Again, I need everything to be with my x squared and have it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 21 from both sides, and I'm going to add 4x to both sides because I like to leave my x squareds where they are. So I have 0 equals x squared plus 4x minus 21. So my a value, a equals a positive 1, b equals 4, and c equals negative 21. Now you might be asking, is a always equal to 1? No, you're going to do examples where a does not equal 1, I promise. All right, let's plug things into the formula. Okay, so again, I'm going to write that off to the side to help me remember where to plug things in. So I have negative b, so negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared. So I'm going to maybe just start simplifying right now. B squared, so 4 squared is 16 minus, and then 4 times 1 times negative 21, all over 2 times 1. I realized this is starting to blend together. Sorry about that. All right, so I have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus, and then 4 times 1 times negative 21 is 84, or negative 84, so minus a negative 84 becomes plus, all over 2 times 1 is 2. So negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 84 is 100, all over 2. And if I keep going, I have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 100 works out to be a nice number. It's 10, all divided by 2. So then my first answer is going to be negative 4 plus 10 divided by 2. My second answer is going to be negative 4 minus 10 divided by 2. Negative 4 plus 10 is 6 divided by 2 is 3, so that's one solution. Negative 4 minus 10 is negative 14 divided by 2 is negative 7. So those would be my two answers, 3 and negative 7. I don't leave it at this stage, and the reason I don't leave it at that stage is because there's no square root left. If there's no square root left, you have to continue on until you have the nice final answers, okay? All right, now I want you to solve this one on your own. Good luck. All right. Hopefully you ended up at a positive 6 and a negative 4. Go ahead and compare your work against mine to make sure that you have all of the right steps and that you got to the right answer. If you have questions about that, please be sure to ask for some help. All right, let's talk about a real-world example. It functions just like what we've been doing, except now it's a word problem. So we have the function shown represents the height of a frog x seconds after it jumps off of, oh, it should say t seconds, sorry. T seconds after it jumps off of a rock. How many seconds is the frog in the air before it lands on the ground? So you can see we were given y equals negative 16t squared plus 10t plus 0.75. So my a value, a equals negative 16, b equals positive 10, and c equals 0.75. Sorry, my pens are freaking out and doing such a colorful display. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing as I've been doing. I'm going to say negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So negative b is going to be negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 0.75, all divided by 2 times negative 16. Okay, so let's start simplifying. I have negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 plus, because I have minus a negative, so it would be 4 times 16 times 0.75 is 48, all over negative 32. So if I keep going from there, I have negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 148 divided by negative 32. From this point, what I can do is I can start solving. I can type into my calculator negative 10 plus the square root of 148. I highly recommend hitting enter on your calculator at this point, and then once you have an answer, hit divided, and then type in negative 32. If you were to type it all in at once, you need to make sure you put parentheses around the entire top, because if you don't, all it's going to do is take the square root of 148 and divide just that number by 32. So you need to make sure to put parentheses around that whole thing if you want to type it in all at once. So anyways, back to this calculation. If I type that into my calculator, I get negative 0.07 if I round. And then if I continue and I do negative 10 minus the square root of 148, type that all in to get my answer. Once I have my answer, divide by negative 32, I get 0.69 seconds. Okay, so if we look at this, I have a positive answer here, which makes sense, right? Because we're talking about time. But if you look at the first answer I got a negative 0.07. Can't really have negative time, so I'm going to throw that answer out. That is not a feasible time. The frog is going to land 0.69 seconds, or 69 hundredths of a second after it jumps. Okay? Now I want you to look at that same exact thing. The equation just changed a little bit. So see if you can figure out how many seconds is the frog in the air before landing on the ground. Round your answer to the nearest hundredth. Good luck. Alright, so if you solved this problem correctly, you should have ended up with a positive 0.65 seconds. Hopefully the other answer you got was negative 0.3, but since we can't really have negative 0.3 of a second, you threw that answer out and you stuck with the 0.65 seconds. If that's not what you got, take a minute, look at my work, compare it to what you wrote down. This is definitely something you should be showing as much work as possible for. Okay, don't try to do this in your head. There are way too many steps for you to try to keep track of all of this. Okay, you need to show work. If you have questions about this, please be sure to ask for some help. All right, our last kind of topic for today's lesson is understanding and using the discriminant. Okay, so the discriminant is what tells us how many solutions there are going to be. You guys have kind of already started asking me this of how do I know when there's going to be one answer and how do I know when there's going to be two? The discriminant is what can be used to tell you how many answers there will be. The discriminant is part of the quadratic formula. It is the part that exists underneath that square root. It's b squared minus 4ac. B represents the same number for the discriminant as it does for the quadratic formula, and same with A and C. So if you can do the quadratic formula, you can definitely do the discriminant. Now the way the discriminant works is when you solve that, when you say b squared minus 4ac, if that number is bigger than 0, you are going to have a graph that looks like this first one here, where it crosses the x-axis twice, meaning there are two real solutions. If you have b squared minus 4ac equals 0, that's when you have a graph that kind of looks like this, where it touches the x-axis only one time. If b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, meaning it's a negative number, that tells you that there are no real solutions. So make sure when you are writing an answer to this, you don't say no solutions, because that is false. This is considered no real solutions. I think I've talked with a few of you about how there are things called imaginary numbers that you'll learn more about later, just not in Algebra 1 with me. So I want you to get into the good practice of saying no real solutions when your discriminant is less than 0. Okay, so if the discriminant is greater than 0, two real solutions. If the discriminant equals 0, one solution. If the discriminant is less than 0, there are no real solutions. Let's practice finding the discriminant and determine how many solutions there are. So this very first one, I have negative 2x squared minus x minus 1. So again, if I start, my a value is negative 2, b is negative 1, and c is negative 1. So if I do the discriminant, that is b squared minus 4ac. So I'm going to have negative 1 squared. Remember, anytime you square a negative, it should become positive. Got to use parentheses on your calculator, otherwise it's going to lie to you and say it's negative. Okay, minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 1. Okay, so negative 1 squared is 1, minus 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times a negative 1 is positive 8. So I have 1 minus 8. 1 minus 8 is negative 7. Since that number is a negative, it's less than 0, my answer is going to be no real solutions. And if it asks you what the discriminant value is, your answer is negative 7. Okay, let's try the next one. I'm going to move this so everything's on the same side as the a squared. So I have 4a squared minus 8a plus 4 equals 0. Because just like when we're solving the quadratic formula, got to have everything on one side set equal to 0. So a equals 4, b equals negative 8, and c equals 4. B squared, so that's negative 8 squared minus 4 times 4 times 4. That's a lot of 4s. Okay, negative 8 squared is 64 minus, and then 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. So 64 minus 64 is 0. And when the answer, or when the discriminant equals 0, we have one real solution. Okay, so the number of solutions is 1 and the discriminant is 0. Next question, 6p squared minus 2p minus 3. A equals 6, b equals negative 2, and c equals negative 3. B squared, that's negative 2 squared minus 4. A, c. Negative 2 squared is 4. Then 4 times 6 is 24. Times negative 3 is 72, or negative 72. So 4 minus negative 72 is positive 72. 4 plus 72 is 76. My discriminant equals 76. And since that's positive, it's bigger than 0, there are two real solutions. right. It is your turn to find the discriminant and determine the number of roots for the equation. Good luck. All right, hopefully you ended up with a discriminant of 0, which means that there is one real solution. If you have questions about that, please be sure to ask for some help. Here is the last slide for today's lesson. It is the concept summary. I recommend taking a screenshot of this, writing this down in your notes, whatever you need to do, so you have a place that you can reference it while you're doing your homework. Okay, these things need to be memorized. I will not give you these formulas, okay? If you have any questions about anything from today's lesson, please be sure to reach out for some help. I am happy to help you. Have a great day.